Welcome to the Summer Birds video tutorial. I'm just going to show you some of the main stitches used in this design. I am starting with the woven wheel roses. I think that's a good place to start. As you can see, I already started stitching on my hummingbird some, which I will talk about shortly. But for the roses, you're going to use a full strand of floss. Don't separate your 6-stranded floss, and I'm just using a simple knot on the end. They start with the scaffolding or spokes. Oops, what kind of needle am I using? There we go. Didn't want to come through at first. I was just doing all that delicate 2-stranded work with a smaller needle, so switching to a larger eye needle, it's like, oh, now I have to work a little bit to get it through the fabric. Also, you'll notice my fabric is getting loose now, which is a no-no. I'm going to tighten it in this hoop. I would really recommend that you bind your hoops. You can use some scraps of fabric. All you're doing is kind of creating like a layer in between the outer hoop and the inner hoop. Because right now, you know, you're just sandwiching this thin layer of fabric, right? It's not a lot to grip on, really. I mean, it's pretty thin. So if you add another layer of fabric, or you actually do the binding, it's going to add multiple layers. You're going to get a much better grip. And you can also use a screwdriver to tighten the screw on the top, so you won't have to mess around with retightening as you go. All right, so there's my scaffolding, and then I'm going to come up near the center, but not through the center, and I'm going to start weaving. So I'm going to go over, under, etc. So with this design, for all the roses, I'm using this variegated floss from DMC. It's very pretty. It changes over time, and I love the way it looks on these roses. I mean, you can replicate it by using different colors of solid floss. I mean, if you have the kit, you know, you're just going to use what's in the kit. But if you grabbed the PDF and you can't find this floss anywhere, you don't have to use it. You can use something similar. You can use, you know, like a peach color for these top roses, and then more of a pink color for the middle roses, and then like a magenta for the lower roses. So don't think that just because you couldn't find the variegated floss that you can't complete the project. As of now, I believe I have these colors in stock on my Etsy shop. I don't sell them by the skein on my regular website though. Skein, whichever you prefer. All right, so I'm continuing my overs and unders. You'll notice that, so near the top, obviously I have this lighter color I'm using, and then as I go towards the bottom, I'm changing what color I use, and it's not perfect. So if you look at well, that's too close up. If you look at the design, you'll see that there's some surprises, I like to call them, to kind of help with the blending. So it's not a really sharp change. Like everything exactly below this line has to be this color. If you're a little bit more soft with your rules where that color changes, it can look more interesting, I think. A little bit more natural, I'll say. So if you enjoy my designs, if you enjoy my videos, if you want to know more about me and get more involved in my community, I did just start a club on Patreon that you can join. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be showing a lot of behind the scenes stuff. We're going to do a monthly Zoom stitch along. We're going to be having monthly prizes, and also a monthly pattern. And this month it is this pattern. So if you were gonna get the pattern anyways, it probably makes sense to check out the club and see if that makes sense. It makes sense to make sense. Very clear. Okay, so there's my rose. You can see it's got some issues, which is good because now I can show you how to fix some issues. So see how one of the applieds kind of separated here and here. I'm actually gonna go around the rose with just some simple stitches to tidy that up a little bit. Kind of to cover it. And you can also do this to cover any guidelines, or if you have like a lopsided rose, you can come in and round it out a little bit like this. Excellent. So while I have this color on my needle, I'm just gonna demo a French knot or two really quick. The French knots don't go here. They will go, well, wherever you want. They're kind of optional. So for mine, I like snuck one in here and one over here. There's one there. Basically, when you're done with all of the vines and the leaves, if you want to go back in and add some French knots, go for it. So here's one of those surprises I was talking about. Like this lighter color is way up here, but then I drew it down here. And then like this is the darker color, but I pulled it up here. And then here's like another surprise. Here's like the lightest green that's supposed to be way up here, but I pulled it way down here. And then like here I did the same thing. Here's like a couple stitches of this green, but down in the dark green section. Those are some surprises. All right, French knot. The easiest way is just going to be a single wrap. Put your needle down near the hole you just made, but not at the same spot. Pull lightly that knot down to the surface of the fabric, then go all the way through with the needle. You'll hear the pop, and then pull. Wrap, place, fabric, pierce, pull again. There you go. Just like that. If you want them thicker, wrap more times. It's going to be harder to pull through, but that's how you make them thicker. Okay. So for the vines, pretty simple. I'm just going to be using back stitch for the vines themselves. I'm using the 6 strands here, but if you think it's too thick, you can definitely use fewer strands. I like that chunky look on this project, at least. I think it looks good with the chunky roses, and then it kind of makes the foliage, the bushes. It's almost like we're in the bushes watching the hummingbirds. So when you do these curves, you want to make sure you have smaller stitch length. If you like consistent stitch length, don't do what I did. I kind of made my stitches bigger when I got to kind of a flatter spot. I actually haven't been able to do videos in a little while. I had some accidents in my stitching studio with a rotary blade and with some cardboard scissors. 2 separate incidents on 2 neighboring fingers. I got a tetanus shot, so that's good. Just a reminder from the universe to slow down. Okay. There we go there. So then we're going to do the leaves. So the really tiny ones are the ones where there's not much space. Like this is kind of a smaller one. I mean, you could fit in a bigger one there. I'm just gonna do a straight stitch here. And like this one, it's pretty tight, right? Like we're really close to all these stitches here. So I'm just gonna do a straight stitch here as well. And if you'll notice, the fabric is actually telling me to use a different color right here. It's telling me to use the medium green, not the dark green, but it's okay. All right, so here we're gonna do a tiny little chain or detached chain stitch. I went up, I'm coming down the same hole, and I'm gonna catch that loop. I'm gonna go up on my guideline here and then catch this loop. Like that. And then tack it down. Right, do it again. This is just detached chain. So up at the base, down in the same hole, back up at the end of the leaf, catch my loop. And back down. There's definitely more elegant ways to do this. But for me, when I'm doing these really tiny ones, I have to do it like as a two-step process like this. And also note, I don't know if you can see, I didn't come up all the way at the end. I came up almost at the end of this guideline because you can see I add a little extra length when I'm tacking it down. Etc. If those start to drive you crazy, just do a bunch of straight stitches. You can even do like 2 on top of each other to make them a little bit fluffy. I go 1 and 2. So it's like something in between, or even 1 and then come up a little bit to the side and then go back in the same hole. Something like that. Okay? So if this starts to make you crazy, especially if you did the winter birds pattern and you're like, oh my god, Jessica, I'm never doing chain stitch again, definitely sub in some other little tiny leaf. Let's stitch a bird. So I have, nope, that's the second color. I have the first color ready to go on my needle. I went ahead and just put a tiny little knot in the back, and I am going to start filling this section with split stitch, possibly back split stitch. So for traditional split stitch, I'm actually going to come up through the previous stitch and go a stitch length away. I find this difficult, so I am going to switch to back split stitch, where I come up a stitch length away and go down to split my stitch. It might look slightly different. Actually, I did a horrible job of splitting that stitch. I think I just came down next to it. Let's try that again. In theory, I should be able to see better doing this way. Okay. So I'm starting with the outline to make sure we get a nice edge here. now that I'm at the bottom, I can either just come up right along the side, or if you like, you can do the other side of the shape first, which I think I'm going to do, and then I'll fill in the center. If you would like, you can make this transition a little bit more smooth. You could have some back and forth between the two greens here, so it's a little bit more of a thread painting. Oops, I almost lost my tail. Or just stick to this more blocky look. I wanted this to be a beginner-friendly pattern, so I did not do long and short stitch. But, you know, when you're filling a shape with split stitch like this, you're just a baby step away from long and short stitch. Okay. So I'm just going to fill in this shape. You can continue doing rows, or if you want, I will show another way to do it, which is almost like thread painting. It would be a good practice, I guess. So I'm making a couple stitches up here, some of them a little longer, some of them a little shorter. And then I'll do the next row, splitting those. So if I was changing color, this would be long and short stitch. I suppose the more proper way to would be coming up like this through those previous stitches. I find it easier when you're coming up through kind of a mess of stitches like that rather than just a single line of stitches. So after you fill with the lightest green, you're going to switch to the next green color, do the same thing, and then you're going to do it with that transition color. It's kind of like a teal. I just did like 1 or 2 rows of that color. It just kind of helps us transition between the greens to the blues. All right, nothing else is going to happen, so just keep doing that. Let's see, I am going to show the blue because I want to show you. So you're going to start at the top and come down here, down the side of the body, all of this. Maybe I'll mark it. So all this section here is the same thing. You're just filling it with the split stitch again, okay? So then, once you get over here, we're going to switch to satin stitch, okay? So you kind of have like a transition here. I'm trying to decide if I want to show more of that or not. For this satin stitch, I did a little bit of compensating stitches to slowly change the angle of my stitch direction. So I'm starting out obviously this direction, and by the end I want to be a little bit more diagonal like that. So what I'm going to do is, like here, I'm going to do a stitch that doesn't come up all the way at the top. And what that's doing is just a little bit of a change in my stitch direction. Another option here, since we have this wing in front and this one in back, if you want to add more depth along this edge, you can always use split stitch along this line first and then cover it with your satin stitches. That way you'll have more of a difference between those two wings. Totally not required. So because we're going to have that navy outline, you don't need to worry about that padding if you don't want to. Sorry, squeaky chair. So here's another one of those compensating stitches, and you can see as a result my angle gets even closer to what I'm going for here. So you could do every other one to change the direction, or you can do it slower than that if you want. It's kind of like doing a 3-point turn in your car to turn around. It's actually not like that at all. Well, I guess it kind of is. It's just a slow change in direction. And you can see my stitches, they're not perfect over here. And that's okay, because we're actually going to cover that with that navy outline. It's interesting to see, like, because that looks great, right? And that's where I'm coming down with my needle, so obviously I have more control. So if you're stitching and you're doing satin stitch and there's one edge that's more important than the other, I always have that be the edge that I come down at. If they're both important, then, well, you just have to choose and do your best. It's hard. It's hard to come up from under the fabric and be right where you want to be. I actually taught my son to do some stitching over the weekend, and what really helped him is having the pattern on both sides of the fabric, because he could not come up on the guideline at all. You know, I mean, he's 6. But I was like, well, that's a good idea, because then you can actually turn over your hoop and see exactly where you're supposed to go. All right, so that is the satin stitch on the wing. I think while I have this blue on my needle still, I'm going to show you. So after you fill in this body with the split stitch like you did here, you can come down and do these tail feathers. Super simple. I just did these excessively long satin stitches. If you don't like how long those are, if that makes you nervous, you can definitely do more of this split stitch instead. So that's all that those are. That's pretty simple. So if you have a hard time seeing the guidelines through these satin stitches, which I'm probably going to have a hard time, you could always do the navy first and then fill in with this blue. That probably makes lots more sense. Okay, so next I'm going to show you that teal color on the wings. You'll note that the small bird doesn't have this detail. If you want to add it, you definitely can. I just thought it was like so tiny. It might be too hard. All right. So, start over here. And I'm going right up to that blue. And I'm just doing some satin stitch. And again, here's one of those excessively long stitches. And here, I guess it was kind of compensating stitches because you can see I kind of shared a hole with those two because I found my shape, it's essentially a triangle. And same here, because here up at the top is where the majority of the change happens, right? We're way up here, and then by the time we're here, very little change in that direction. So if you like the colors I used for this bird, stick with them. I just wanted something that would like contrast with the florals. And I've already done like Anna's hummingbird a few times, so like, okay, I gotta do something else. But feel free to use any colors you want here. You can have a lot of fun, I think. You could also use some sparkly floss, metallic, that's the word. Love seeing that iridescence on the hummingbirds. We were actually watching them last night. Or was that yesterday morning? It all blends together. Yeah, I think that was yesterday morning. We were having a nice cup of coffee outside, my husband and I. And I mean, they're just like little fighter jets. They're so incredibly fast. I am happy with how this is looking. These stitches are pretty tiny. If using 2 strands here is too much for you, it feels too thick, you don't like that texture, move down to a single strand. It's no big deal. Excellent. So now I'm going to come in with the silver and fill in everything else here with satin stitch. I find it easier to come up a way and then go down where I'm meeting the other satin stitch. This it looks like I missed a stitch in between those two, doesn't it? There's like a little gap, so I'm going to go in and fill in that little gap. Oops. Or I'm going to get stuck on a knot first. There we are. Just like that. No one has to know they were out of order. And then I'm going to sneak in a little stitch right here too. Okay. So, before I was talking about how I like to come up and then down where I need to be more precise. So in this case, I mean, really this edge, we do want this to be really precise. But when I have a situation where I'm actually going up to some other stitching, I like to go down at the other stitching. I get nervous going up. Like I'm gonna kind of uproot that stitch, if that makes sense. I don't know, I don't think a stitch fits there. I was maybe gonna add another one, but there was no room. So when you are coming down here next to the teal stitches, this one I'm tucking in because again we have a little bit of a triangle shape here. A little bit of compensation. So make sure you're coming in or going down right, right next to this stitch. You don't want a gap there. It's weird, I'm doing like way better on this wing than I did on the sample hoop. Oh, I only got one in. I may have to go back and add another stitch. We'll see how it looks when I do the navy, if it covers it. So the navy lines, they're gonna go below the teal. So I don't have to cover up the guideline. I can cover it up because I know the teal acts as a guideline. Look at that. I didn't go exactly like I said to do. There is an error. So here I left a little gap, which is fine. It's going to get covered. You don't have to leave a gap, but you can. I must have got my spacing wrong because look, I fit three stitches here and only one there. That's all good. Okay, so I'm gonna, keep filling this in, and then you're gonna come in with your blue, your dark blue. So if you want, you could do the eye first and then kind of like make your way down. So this stripe and the beak are going to be split stitch like you did here, just obviously a single line. You want the eye to stand out a little bit more than that, so I recommended doing like a padded satin stitch. So basically 2 layers of satin stitch will work. So I'm just kind of, or you can just do whatever underneath the satin stitch. I want to make like a mini cross stitch. It's such a small spot. And then I'll come on top of that. Come on, eyes. It's so tiny. So maybe I'll go in the other direction again. It doesn't matter which direction you end with. You don't want it to be like buggy. And just give it a little depth, because then we're gonna have like a stitch here and some stitches over here. Oops. Let's make that beak. And then what I did for my sample hoop is I came back in with a single strand of the silver and did an outline on like one side of the eye to help it stand out even more. So that's how I'm going to fill the beak. And then after doing the beak, I just, this will be filled in, so you're just going to do a nice outline. Once we get over here, make sure, I guess I should say, make sure this wing's done first. I guess I should have said that too. And then come in and make this line help designate between the two wings here. Otherwise they'll kind of blend into each other, right? If you think this line is too thick, you can always just do a single strand of floss to make it a little less punchy. So for the top of the wing, because it is curved, I didn't do the straight stitches. I just continued with the split stitch. Oops. Like so. Then we can switch to the straight stitches. So just below your teal, and so what I'm doing here is like measuring where I want to go, so I know where to come down with my needle so that I'm parallel with the turquoise line there. So that's where I want to intersect, right here. So there. Okay, there was a gap. It's gonna be okay. Try again. That one should be better. Kind of tricky because you don't want to cover that line, the teal, but you don't want the silver to show through. So it's tricky, right? So that's part of the reason why I didn't do it with a smaller bird. It's like, oh, it might get too tricky. If you don't want to do this, actually, you can skip the teal and just make the wings like the small bird's wings. So you would skip that whole teal section and you would just jump right into filling with the silver light blue, and then adding these guidelines, or these straight stitches, excuse me. Or like I said, with the tail down here, you might want to do these lines first and then fill with the other color so that you don't lose your guidelines with the fill color. Does that make sense? So you can use that as well for the feathers on the wings. All right, so that's the basics. That's how you're going to stitch those hummingbirds. If you need more instruction, if you think I left any gaps in this video, please let me know. I'm happy to come back and fill in any details or help with anything. Excellent. Have fun.